Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar on capacity management. Before we get started, I'm going to go through just a few quick housekeeping things. So the slides and recording will be posted to our website after the webinar, so you'll be able to access them at a later date. Additionally, we will have time for Q&A today, so please chat in your questions as you have them throughout the webinar. Make sure that you send them to me, the host. You can chat in with the right side panel of your screen. If that's not currently visible, you can access it by hitting the little thought bubble on the bottom toolbar. And again, chat in your questions as you have them, and we'll be addressing questions at the end. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the Department of Health, who is going to present today. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Department of Health, Colette Poulin. And today we are going to go over capacity management. So we did have previously in March of 2019 a capacity management webinar that was probably a lot for people to digest due to the timing of the transition. So we thought, as we have some more information and have been practicing this for a couple months, that it would be a good time to have a refresher and also to share more information with folks that has developed over time. So, as I mentioned, we're going to go over a refresher. We're going to talk about how we're tracking children in our new consolidated children's waiver. The process and the operations, how we will be communicating, and then some other nuances of capacity management. So, in our goal today, as we mentioned, is really to outline the process once again and do a refresher to make sure that folks understand the difference between those children that transitioned from one of the 6 waivers that consolidated into the children's waiver, and then the difference between that and new children that are coming into the waiver, and how a slot is assigned to them, and how that process moves forward for that child in tracking of children in the consolidated waiver. And then I think our biggest point today is how we are communicating with health home care managers and CES, ensuring that children have a slot assigned to them, that they're keeping a slot, and that folks are doing what they need to do to ensure that the child is properly enrolled in the waiver, and that there's good communication going back and forth between those that are doing eligibility and our DOH team here, our capacity management team. So just quickly, and I'm hoping most folks know this, but when we combined our consolidated, the 6 waivers, the 6 previous waivers, as you see here in the blue circles, those previous waivers into the consolidated children's waiver, then we needed to also combine the slots from those waivers. And we needed to come up with a process to do that because each waiver had their own process for managing how they had children enter their specific waiver, how they tracked those children, and if the waiver had a slot capacity limit, that they also managed that. So now that we have one new consolidated children's waiver for the entire state, that no wrong door for a child, then we needed to come up with a process statewide, and that would be our DOH capacity management. So we thought this was the best way to manage capacity was on a statewide process. And so as you see there, we took the 6 waivers that consolidated into the children's waiver, and we broke those 6 waivers into 4 what we call target populations. So when you conduct the home and community-based eligibility determination, there are 4 target populations, and that your child who needs HCBS will hopefully fall into one of those categories. So we have the medically fragile. So we did have, right, our Care at Home here at DOH 1 and 2 served that population. And then our OCFS partners and their Bridges to Health also served this population as well. And then we have our OMH serious emotional disturbance. So OMH had a waiver that served this population of children. And again, OCFS Bridges to Health also served an SED population. And then we have our developmental disability and medically frail population, which was served by the OPWDD waiver for their Care at Home. So I want to be really clear that this is not their comprehensive waiver. This is their previous Care at Home waiver. And then we have the developmental disability and in foster care, which was solely held by OCFS Bridges to Health. So we combined populations or grouped populations that were the same, and we ended up with these 4 target populations. Capacity management is manage the slots by tracking the target population separately, as well as 5 regions throughout the state. We're utilizing the OMH regions. There is a slide that breaks down those regions and tells you which counties are in each region. Our goal with slot capacity is to monitor the enrollment of children in the waiver, to give out information about their specific target population and also their region, so that we know throughout the state that there's equal access to the children's waiver. We've been asked a lot about slots and the increase of slots. So I think in many webinars we have shared that our submission to CMS outlines that there's an increase of slots. And you'll see here that when we transitioned to the children's waiver, we were already in year 3, because when we built the children's waiver, we used the DOH Care at Home 1 and 2 waiver. So we just proceeded with moving with their waiver as the foundation. And so you can see there in April, and that base number of 1755 was just for Care at Home. And then the increase of the 5,840 were the children that were transitioned into the waiver. And as you can see, July was our first increase, and we have broken down our increase of slots by a monthly basis. And on average, it's 191. It does fluctuate on some of the months. And as you can see, throughout hopefully the next 2 years, we will get a number of slots that are 13,894. And of course, our goal is to serve as many children as possible, hoping that we never have a wait list. Our team here at DOH, that's what we call our capacity management team, is monitoring on a daily basis the number of waiver participants that are being determined eligible. And we have a system for tracking them by the target population and region. Again, we have for ourselves an internal threshold that should we start to reach that threshold of enrolled children, then we will develop a wait list process. In our previous webinar in March, we outlined a wait list process, as well as how we will determine crisis slots. My goal is to never get to a wait list, but we do have a developed process. And again, we are monitoring eligibility into the children's waiver so that we can always make a plan if there needs to be a wait list. And as I mentioned, this is the breakdown of regions, which was based on OMH. And we also added here the health homes that are in those regions. So many of you hopefully can see yourselves in the health home you serve and know where the region is, because the next slide is some numbers so that you can see. So this is the first time that we have produced some numbers. We have still been doing quite a bit of cleanup from the transitional group. So you'll see here that you'll see unknown. We are still in the process of doing some cleanup to ensure that all children that are being served in the waiver are counted. So the total number of transitioning kids that were reported by the six waivers and their providers to DOH was 6,178. And as of yesterday, we have enrolled 6,455. So you have the breakdown by the four populations, and as I mentioned, there is an unknown, and we are hoping that by the end of September, the beginning of October, we'll have that all cleaned up. And then we broke down each population by the regions, so you can see where, so that you and all of us can see where the children are coming from. And again, this will help us to monitor, to make sure there's equal access, and also that we understand where the service need is. You also see under each of the regions that we also have in some of the areas an unknown, again, that we are hoping to clean up. These slides will be posted and sent around, so you don't need to write this down. You will receive that information. And then we also want to make sure that people understand that as kids are being enrolled, if you didn't think that increase of enrollment was high enough, it's also to remind folks that children are also getting discharged, right? So we've had over 217 children that have also, that's a typo, that's supposed to be total discharge of September 24th, so we'll fix that. And again, we broke that down by population and also by region. And again, we still have a little bit of cleanup here of the unknown. So again, you can see what is happening with children. Okay, so what I want to talk about is our process and operations, and why we might have some of these unknowns is about communication. So this is very important how we proceed here. This is just really an overview that, you know, a child is determined eligible, and then capacity management is monitoring that on a daily basis, and that we then assign a slot to that child, and that there is communication with the health home care manager in CS regarding that that child has a slot. So the first thing we want to make sure that people understand is that if your child was a transitioning child between January and April of 2019, and we know that we had a couple children that have also were counted as a transitioning child, maybe early May. So if you were told by DOH during the transition phase that your child was counted as a transition child, so former waiver providers gave lists back and forth with DOH, then your child is considered a transitioning child from one of the previous 6 waivers, and that once your child was counted as a transitioning child, they were automatically put in a slot. So even though the waiver hadn't opened until April 1st and tracking with capacity wasn't a thing yet, we had already counted these children as a slot, and children keep their SWAT until they're discharged or disenrolled. So there is no need when you are conducting the reassessment on an annual basis or when there's a significant life event, there's no need for capacity management or the health home care manager to say, I reassessed this child, I want to make sure the child has a SWAT. If you're concerned whether or not the children you're serving in waiver do have a SWAT, you can absolutely reach out to capacity management and they can confirm that with you. But we want to make sure that everyone understands that all over 6,000 children that transition were put in a SWAT and they maintain their SWAT unless they are discharged or disenrolled. Then we want to highlight for any new child, so as of April 1st and forward, if a new child came to your attention that needed HCBS, then the process is the following. So the child is found eligible. So you have, as a care manager, CS, conducted the HCBS LOC eligibility in the UAS system, and you have signed the document in the UAS, and it will spit out an outcome that says the child is found eligible or not. So for children, newly eligible children, by the next business day, capacity management reviews all our eligibility reports in the UAS, and then they will reach out to the care manager, CS, and inform you that a slot has been assigned to your child. Okay? So a slot must be given to your child or youth that you intend to serve as a health home care manager because you have now found the child eligible for that child to be enrolled in services. So that's really important. If for some reason you do not hear from capacity management by the next business day, please reach out to us. You'll see there that capacity management will be communicating with the care manager through what we call the health commerce system, the HCS secure file transfer. One of our #1 issues with giving slots is that health home care managers have not set up their HCS secure file transfer. And so we hear from folks that they haven't heard from us and they're concerned. It's because we're trying to find you and notify you. So we have some slides on that. As the child is found eligible and you have received notification that the child has a slot, then you as a care manager, CS, will then proceed with your processes of notifying the family through the notice of determination that they're found eligible, and then you will go about your work and, you know, developing that plan of care and the freedom of choice form and all those things that are the process to connect the child and or youth to an appropriate HCBS service. So if the child is found not eligible, then you will not hear from capacity management because, of course, we would not need to give that child a slot, right? And you as a care manager would notify the family through the notice of decision that they were not found eligible for waiver services. And of course, you would work with the family, I would hope, to connect them to other appropriate services to meet their needs. And if the child is in Medicaid and also can be determined health home eligible, then you could continue to serve the child as what we call health home only. So they meet the chronic conditions and those types of things to be health home eligible. So there is the potential that you could continue to serve the family and the child under the health home only. if, of course, they meet eligibility. So the biggest thing here that we want to express, like I said when I went through the agenda, is our goal here is to is about communication. So since this is a statewide process and not agency by agency or county by county process where there was a little more direct contact between providers and care managers or SPOAs, and that this is a statewide process, it's really important that we have good communication and that people understand what the communication flow is. So again, here we have a DOH, what we call our capacity management team, that they are looking on a daily basis to track and make sure any child who is eligible and getting ready to enroll in the children's waiver has a slot assigned to them so that they can have that slot, keep that slot until such time they leave the waiver. It's important that the health home care managers communicate when there's a change in status of the child, and we do have a slide on that. Again, we can't maintain the list accurately if we don't know if a child got discharged. Sometimes the child is found eligible, but then the family says, we're not interested in waiver services. So the child now has a slot, and we won't know here at DOH unless the health home care manager, CS, tells us that the family's not interested, or if the child gets discharged, or they went into the hospital, or these types of things would make us continue to keep that child in the slot and be counted when they don't need to be. The concern about this is that our tracking would obviously be inaccurate, but then as we continue to keep children on our tracker who are not receiving HCBS services, then we may reach a wait list quicker, and then we may have children on a wait list that don't need to be on a wait list because there are slots taken by children who are no longer getting services, or there's a change in their status, and maybe they are counted twice. So we want to make sure there's good partnership and communication so we never get to that point of a wait list or that a child is delayed in getting access because of our information being incorrect. So as I mentioned earlier, one of our biggest barriers to communication is the HCS secure file transfer. So every care manager has to be in the health commerce system. That's a requirement to access the MAP system for health home tracking or to get into the UAS, to complete your HCBS eligibility determination, your CANs, et cetera. So all care managers have an HCS account, and what you need to do is activate your secure file transfer. So you need to go find that, and if you know the HCS, there's a little alphabet at the top, and you find that letter F, and you go and hit that, and it will walk you through the process. We also have some fine links here that can show you how to do that, but you must activate your account because the DOH team here will not be able to communicate with you. It's also very important that people understand emailing a DOH, whether it's the health home program or the capacity management team, through Outlook or some other email service is not appropriate if you're going to give PHI information, right, personal health information. So if you're going to give us, you know, dates of birth and SIN and names, it's not appropriate. So that is why we're using the secure file transfer to have communication. Now, the importance here also is to let you know that secure file transfer does not work like Outlook, and that once something is sent to you, after 14 days, it's deleted. So we've run across the situation where we have emailed folks through the secure file transfer, and then they tell us they never heard from us, but they have not checked on a regular basis, or it's been after 14 days, so that is the problem. Now, when you connect to Secure File Transfer, when you get an email in Secure File Transfer, you should get a notice in your Outlook or your other email account that's connected to the that you, okay. So it's important, I think I was saying that it's important that when you go into the HCS, you verify the email address that is connected to your HCS account, because you will get a notification when an email comes through the secure file transfer to you. You will get an email that says you have a secure file transfer email. So that would alert you of that. So as I already mentioned, once you have conducted the HCBS LOC eligibility determination, you must make sure your secure file transfer is activated so that you can receive the communication from capacity management. You only need to activate it one time. Once you do it, it is activated. We really encourage that agencies make sure that HCS accounts are set up for new employees, that they make sure that secure file transfer is part of that training, similar to MAP into the UAS, to make sure that every care manager is automatically connected so that when they get to the point of conducting an HCBS eligibility determination, then they will be able to get those emails. Okay, so I've talked about when DOH capacity management is going to tell you or reach out to you to tell you that you have a slot for your child. So what do you need to do as a care manager or CS when you conduct an HCBS eligibility determination? When do you need to start communicating with us? So the big thing is, as I already mentioned, if you're not sure of the children you're serving, if they have a slot, please reach out to us. We can verify that lickety-split and let you know. And if they don't have a slot, then we will research that and find out how that happened and make sure that child gets a slot, right? So the other times you need to communicate with us is when a child already has a slot and now they have a name change or a SIN change. So this happens, unfortunately, with some of our kids who are in foster care, or if other eligibility things happen with someone's Medicaid. So that's really important because we may have Johnny Smith with SIN number 123 in a slot, and then Johnny changes his name because he got adopted, as an example, to Ray something, and his number is 8910. So now we're putting Ray in a slot as well, and we're counting 2 kids for one. Or we never know about Ray, and when things change for Ray, there's a lot of work done here to try to track down who Ray is and what's going on with Ray, because we had him as Johnny. So that's really important. Also, when a child is discharged or disenrolled from the children's waiver, they are no longer receiving services. They're no longer eligible, so they're discharged. If the child is having any change to their status, you want to reach out to us. I also want to remind folks for transitioning children only, if they are found ineligible for their HCBS on their reassessment, that we have an override process, which I will talk about on slide 28 there, and you would need to notify us if you want an override. And again, I just want to make sure that people understand if you're not sure your child has a slot, you want to reach out to us, that's important. On the HCBS workflow forms, it does ask the care manager if the child has a slot, and I believe it asks the date you got that slot. So that will be really important for you to know, so that you can verify with the managed care plans and the HCBS providers that, you know, the child does have a slot. So I just want to make sure that people also know that if we just put out guidance that if children want to move from one waiver to another, so the OPWDD comprehensive waiver, if they want to move from our children's waiver over there, or they want to come from over there to us, that again, capacity management needs to be notified, and there is a transfer step-by-step document that's on our website, and the link is here, so that's really important to know. Now, I'm not going through the NOD process, the notice of decision process, or anything like that. We're just really talking about you notifying care management, and then you as a care manager would, you know, follow through with the steps that you need to follow. So this is just really a visual to make sure that people understand that, you know, this is making sure that families and children have the right connection to the right providers, and that they know they're in waiver, they're receiving services, and that they have a slot. So it's really important that this communication goes up and down and everyone's talking to one another and making sure we all understand the children who are receiving services. So this is, again, another little visual. What does capacity management need to hear from you when there is a change of status? So you're going to go through that secure file transfer, please, 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 because this is obviously PHI information. We have a capacity mailbox that was on a previous slide and is on another slide. For all children, we need their name. I know that's the hardship, but we do need their name and their SIN number. Their date of birth would be helpful, and you want to tell us what kind of change is happening. So we've received emails where we have a name and a SIN, but we don't really know what the change is. And then you need to tell us what the change is, right? So if the child's name or SIN has changed, we need to know their previous name and what their new name is, or their previous SIN and what their new SIN is. If you have the date that that change happened, that would be very helpful. This will help us to go find the child, make sure they had a slot previously, give the new name child the slot, and things like that. If the child is discharged or disenrolled, you know, again, give us their name, their SIN, their date of birth, saying that they're discharged. And if you can please tell us the date, the reason if you have it, and the target population. Again, we have this information, but if we can't find it, then this information is very helpful to ensure that we are tracking children appropriately. Now, if you remember, I'm going to go back for a minute, this wonderful diagram here that had the provider. So you might have been scratching your head saying, why does the provider need to know I have a slot? Well, we have these new things for the children waiver. It's called RE codes, right? So they're recipient restriction exemption codes. We created new RE codes for the children's waiver. They're called the K codes, and this is the list of K codes, right? So it tells everyone if the child is HCBS LOC, if they have a K1 on their file, their Medicaid file, not your health home care management file, but the Medicaid file tells the whole world that the child has HCBS. And then it tells them the diagnostic category or the target population that they fell in, and it shares information with providers. Now, we built this off the previous waiver codes, so you can see in that first column, it used to be numbers, and then it tells you which waiver the child was in, and we now can crosswalk that. In the previous waivers, they would have one RE code. Now at K codes, a child could have multiple K codes, but every child needs a K1 right now who's in waiver because that shows that they're HCBS eligible. Okay? So again, you may say to yourself, well, why do they need this? Well, it's really important because what happens is when we here at the OH capacity team gives your child a slot and then puts them on our tracker, then we have some staff here at DOH that puts the appropriate K codes on the child's Medicaid file. So this alerts the local districts, the managed care plans, your health homes, even medical providers or behavioral health providers, that if they were to go look up this child's Medicaid file in eMedNY, ePaces, they would see that they are eligible for waiver services. The other reason it's important for you to communicate with us is when your child is discharged and they lose their slot or their slot is discharged from them, we also have those K codes removed. So again, we're telling everyone that this child is no longer in waiver. So you say, well, why is that important? Well, as I mentioned, it tells everybody that the child's enrolled in waiver. Your managed care plans, right, want to make sure that children in waiver are getting the right services. Those HCBS providers that you're going to refer those children to services cannot bill. They cannot get paid for the work they're doing unless the K codes are up. If you don't communicate with us, then we may not put K codes up or take K codes down, and so there may be billing problems for providers. So that's very important. And as I mentioned, this is all tracking capacity across the state. So this is telling us, just like those numbers I gave you, where are kids getting services? Who's getting services? How many kids are getting services? So that we can plan for service needs, excuse me, and make sure that children are getting the services they need. And it also tracks the capacity so that, as I mentioned before, that we have, if we need to have a wait list, that we're tracking kids and getting them in line to services accordingly. Now, a role of a care manager, a standard practice in care management, is on a monthly basis, you should be verifying the children that you serve, that they continue to have Medicaid. And when you go in eMedNY or ePaces to verify your child has Medicaid, you would be able to see the A1, A2 codes for a health home, and then you would be able to see these K codes. So that is another way that you can check if your child has a slot. If you go in and your child has a K code, then they should be counted on our tracker as having a slot. Now, what I mentioned, we are doing a little bit of cleanup. So again, if you go in eMedNY or Paces and you see that your child maybe is a transitioning child, you knew your child was a transitioning child, you thought your child had a slot and they don't have a K code, please let us know. We'll verify if they're on our cleanup list. We've already had HCBS providers call us and say they cannot get paid for their billing for the services they're doing because there's no K code up on the file for the child. So we have a group of folks here that are doing a little bit of research and then trying to fix these K codes so that, we know all those unknowns and that it's an accurate reflection of who is in services. So that was a lot of information about capacity management, why it's important for us to have good communication, and also what our team here is doing to make sure you are notified that the child has a slot and to make sure the proper K codes are up so your child can get the services that they need and all the providers are aware. The other thing that we had to build into this whole transformation is we needed to make sure to CMS that children who are transitioning from one of the 6 waivers, that there was some continuity of care, that because we had this big transformation process, the children shouldn't lose their HCBS services if they need them to remain in the community and in their home safely, that they shouldn't lose their services because we have a new tool or a new process. So we developed an override process for only transitioning children, and we have the policy on our website, and then we have a form, and the links are here, and that's what the form looks like there. And I have about 3 slides here. I'm not going to go through the whole thing because you can read the policy. But again, the biggest thing is this is for transitioning children for continuity of care. So that's really important for folks to know. And that when you're conducting their reassessment, right, so any transitioning child that moved into the consolidated children's waiver did not need an HCBS LOC right away. They only needed a CAN, but you still need to do your LOC on an annual basis. So you should know when your child is due for their annual determination. That date was set by their enrollment in your previous waiver, right? So that's a transitioning child. Then when you do your HCBS LOC, and if the child is found not eligible, then you can consider applying for an override. Now, I really need to highlight this middle portion here in this slide, that this is only going to be happening until March 31st, 2020, because every transitioning child should have received at least one reassessment, right? Because if it's an annual assessment and you transition them by April 1, then they should have a new one, right? The other thing is the override is very specific. You need to believe, along with your LPHA, that the child without the continuation of HCBS services would be at risk of a higher level of care, okay? So it's really important to note. And as I said, you'll reach out to capacity management. The form is on our website. And it's a fillable form, so you can fill it right out right there, and then you can transmit it in that secure file transfer email. And we have a person that's their responsibility is to review these. And I want to make sure that people understand that this is a partnership with our state partners. So when we receive your override, we communicate with them. But this bullet 2 is really important. As I said, you only need to complete the override if you want the child to continue in HCBS and you can justify or believe that without these services, the child would be hospitalized, institutionalized, nursing home, whatever the word is you want to use, a higher level of care. That is what this override process is for. So you will fill out that form. You don't have to attach any other documents with it. You will send it through our secure file transfer because, you know, there's lots of PHI there. We ask that in the subject line you put request override or override, anything you want to say as long as the word override's there so that the person knows immediately that these are override cases that are being requested. And what happens here is the person here at VOH Capacity Management reviews those, and if the child came from a previous waiver, which they should have because they're a transitioning child, then we send those out to the respective agencies, whether that's OCFS, OPWDD, or OMH, and we ask them to review, and then they either grant the override or not. And these two boxes are pretty much the same in that you will be notified that the override has been granted or not, and then you will notify the family and you will follow the notice of decision process. Now, the question has come up that, whoops, is that clicker happy? Sorry about that. I think it's right here. So that bold statement there is, as you're waiting for your override, please continue to keep the child in waiver. Do not disenroll them. Continue to service them. Do not issue an NOD. Do not issue a notice of determination to the family saying you're not eligible because you're asking for an override, right? And you want to make sure that the family's not confused. So you complete your HCBS LOC for a transitioning child, and you find out that the child is not eligible. You, the LPHA, other providers that are involved are very concerned that the services the child has is really helpful, and that without those services, the child may go to a higher level of care. You will complete this form, submit it. Everyone will continue to serve the child as they always have, and then when you get the notification back that the child has been granted the override or not, then you will notify the family that they continue to be in waiver if it's granted, or that they're no longer eligible for the waiver. You want to make sure that that documentation is in your file, because there's no way on any system currently to make sure that people, to notify people that even though this child's not eligible, that they were granted an override. We're hoping to have a build in one of the systems so that can be noted, but right now there's no process. So the only way anybody would know why you continue to service a child when the LOC was they were not eligible is because you have this approved piece of paper. So if you continue to service a child when they're no longer eligible, then that would be an issue, right? So as I said, if you're going to follow this process, please continue to service them so that the family gets one message at the time of the override being granted or not granted, so that you can give them the proper notice of decision. And keeping that documentation is very important. Now remember, the communication that's going on between you and capacity management is over secure file transfer. And as I mentioned to you, that's really important, is secure file transfer keeps an email for 14 days. So you need to print that, you need to store it somewhere else, you need to copy it, you need to do whatever you need to do to get that out of the secure file transfer, because in a month you can't go, I'm serving this child because they got an override, because it won't be there anymore. So that's really important, that when we say store it in the case file, that you want to print that out, or if your health home has a system where you upload it or something like that, that you do that and not leave it in the secure file transfer. Okay, so that's the end of our refresher. As I mentioned, it was, in one of the other slides, there's a link to the other webinar for March, and that gives a lot more detail and information. And as I mentioned, it also gives information about what are we going to do if there's ever a wait list and crisis slots and things like that. So if you want to learn more about that, I would direct you to that webinar. As I also mentioned, all the override documents are on our website, and the links are in this PowerPoint. So I believe we'll have this PowerPoint probably posted on the MCTAC site, hopefully by tomorrow. and we can also circulate it through our listserv so that you have the PowerPoint and the information right away. So I believe we have time for some questions. I don't. So you can just give us a minute. Our friends at McTac is sending us some questions so that we can try to answer some of those. So we're just going to put folks on hold for a minute.
And while you take a look at those, one of the questions was to just show the slide with the regions again, so I'll just pull that up while you guys take a look at the questions.
Okay, so somebody asked, how does this affect freedom of choice for families, if affected at all? So I don't know if you want to elaborate, but the freedom of choice form, so you complete your HCBS eligibility, the child is found eligible, right? And of course you've talked to the family, because in the UAS system it says, does the family want the services? So hopefully you already know that. Right, and as I mentioned, the next business day, you're going to hear from capacity management that the child has a slot. So you know you're going to continue to do whatever you're doing. You're going to sit down with the family and you're going to go over their freedom of choice, where they are going to pick their providers and the services for your development of the plan of care. So I don't think this process really affects the freedom of choice. It's just part of the process. So somebody is saying about the secure file transfer that there's a problem because things expire and vanish in 14 days. So absolutely, that is the system. So as I mentioned several times, and apologize if people didn't know that. Does this say it on the screen when you sign up? So I'm getting a head shake here. So when you go validate your secure file transfer in the HCS, remember under S, you go find it. There is a lot of words on a page there. It does say that things expire in 14 days. That's why we wanted to highlight that. There is no way to retain messages. We've even had people try to do other folders in the HCS secure file transfer. It will disappear. It's there for 14 days. And, you know, there's a really good reason for that, so I just want to make sure people understand, because it's annoying and I understand that, but the reason is the HCS secure, well, first of all, the HCS, right, if you look in there, has many, many programs for many different services for the Department of Health and for the state. And so secure file transfer, it could be millions and millions of emails for all these different programs, and I believe this is their way for their server not to get backed up, right? So again, you would have to save the message in a different format, cut and paste it, download it, whatever you need to do. So this is the easiest way we have to communicate, because everyone has to already be on HCS, and we all know that all the health homes have different systems. So this is one universal system that everybody already has access to. So apologize for that frustration. So someone's asking, how long does it take for HCBS eligibility and things like that? I'm going to go through the other questions because this was not about HCBS eligibility, but if we have time, I will try to answer those. Okay, so there's the question. So So if a transitioning member from a previous waiver is guaranteed a slot until they are discharged, do they still need to do an HCBS LOC completed in the UAS? So yes, absolutely. It is a requirement by the federal government that a child in waiver needs to be assessed to see if they continue to meet the level of care requirements on a minimum of an annual basis. If the child does not have a current LOC, then they would need to be discharged. So, you know, if you have some concerns about that or there's problems with that, you definitely need to let us know. And this is not a new thing, right? Those previous 6 waivers all needed to have a level of care done on an annual basis. So that is a requirement of HCBS. So there's a question here, is there any way for capacity management to CC an agency primaries contact so that important correspondence is not going to frontline care management staff? Like, I'm receptive to that. I just don't know how we would do that. So when we launched Children's Health Home and then when we were doing the transition process, we had what we call single points of contact, SPOCs, for the providers, and we found lots of issues and problems with that, right? And, you know, people move or change, people don't let us know, and sometimes that was a single point of contact person, might have been, you know, somebody that might not have been responsive, and then we had care managers and folks saying, I never got the message. So if you want to set up that kind of system in your agency, you definitely can. But we really think it's important that the care manager knows, right? It's the care manager's responsibility to send the NOD. It's the care manager's responsibility who's talking to the family. So they should really know if the child has a slot. So again, we're receptive if people have some ideas, but so far that hasn't been successful. So maybe some new ideas we can brainstorm about. Okay, so somebody's asking for the exact email address for capacity management.
Not on there.
It is.
No, you might.
Don't look at the slides, you might be getting dizzy. Okay, right here at the bottom. So somebody's asking what the exact address is for capacity management right here. So if you go into your HCS, you can do a search, but it's capacity management share mailbox. Okay, I can't put a link here because with the HCS, you can't just click and link. You have to actually go into the HCS because it's a secure network and blah, blah, blah. So I was just being told that in the HCS it says capacity management at health.newyork.gov, that kind of stuff. So I think you'll get the idea. And then once you find it and you email us one time, then it will always come up on your queue. So it's just like Outlook and other things. As you start to email people, then it automatically starts to pop up. So you'll just have to do that one time. Okay, so the question is, I'm sorry, it was a little long. If we are transitioning a youth from the OMH, or we transition, sorry, past tense, a youth from the OMH waiver to Health Home prior to March, and their reassessment is due now, and they are not eligible in the UAS, does that mean they can no longer receive HCBS since their Medicaid was through the waiver, we must disenroll them from Health Home 2. So correct. So if your child was a transitioning child and you completed their annual HCBS LOC and you don't believe that they fit the criteria for an override, then you would disenroll them from the waiver and you would have to disenroll them from Health Home because a family of one is what I'm thinking you're saying by Medicaid. So they were only getting Medicaid because they were in the waiver. Now remember, there's a notice of decision that you have to send, and the family does have a right to a fair hearing. So there are those things, and in that notice of decision, not that this webinar is about that, but the family can check the box that says they want the services to continue while they wait for their fair hearing. So there is a way for the family to continue their HCBS services while they're waiting for their fair hearing. And I believe we will be doing a webinar in October about notices of decisions in those processes, and we will talk about those processes with capacity, how they impact capacity management. So, but you're on the right track. Okay, so the question is, what if the override is denied for the transitioning member who is guaranteed a spot? Okay, so nobody's guaranteed a spot. I'm just saying that when a transitioning kid was transitioned, we gave them a slot and they keep a slot until they're discharged, right? Nobody's guaranteed a slot because then we would never have a wait list. So any child, while they're new or not, receive their, once they receive a slot, they can keep it until they're discharged, right? For the transitioning child who you have completed an override and it's been denied, then you would have to disenroll them and give them the appropriate notice of decision. Now, I don't know of any overrides that have been denied. There has been, I shouldn't say that, there's been, I believe, a couple overrides that have been denied, but they were asked to be resubmitted. And I do know that like OMH and some of our other partners have actually reached out to care managers to make sure they have the information to grant the override. So if you're having a concern, please reach out to us. But our goal here is not to deny. Our goal is to have continuity of care for these transitioning kids, but it needs to meet the criteria. So maybe you didn't share that information, so it might have been sent to you that it can't be approved because you didn't share the appropriate information. We have had a couple denied because the Health Home Care Manager Supervisor is the signing LPHA, and so I hope everybody knows that anybody associated to the health home cannot be the signer of the LPHA, right? That's a conflict of interest. So you may have received a denial saying you need someone else to sign the form. So if you go get that form signed by somebody else, you can resubmit it. So again, our goal is not to deny the overrides, but we do need the justification, right? Remember, we need to report to CMS how we transition children and how we had continuity of care. We have already reported to them the number of overrides we have received, so we're going to have to report this out, and we need the appropriate documentation, just like you will need once it's approved or denied, in the file for any type of audit. Okay, so somebody's asking, how are providers notified of a change in K code? I'm not sure what someone's asking. So I'm going to guess. If you're asking if the child is disenrolled and they lose their K code, the only folks that are notified is the local district. So when we put K codes up or we take K codes down, we inform the local district, the LDSS, or in New York City, HRA, that the child's in the waiver or the child has left the waiver, so that when their Medicaid determination comes up, they know how to proceed, right? And for those children who are family of one, then the district would know what needs to happen depending on enrollment or discharge. But other providers in the community are not notified. But again, when they would go look up a child's Medicaid case on eMedNy or eBasis, they would either see the K code or they wouldn't see the K code for the waiver. So if I'm not answering your question, if you want to clarify, that would be helpful. Okay, so what happens to the care at home children who are initially advised to place a waiver service on their plan of care to have them transition? They are at risk of a higher level of care but may not use waiver services within the year since previously care managers, WAS, the waiver, is that waiver?
Was the waiver.
Oh, was the waiver service. What happens 2020? Okay. Wow, that was a lot of, okay, so let's take this one at a time. Every single child needs an annual HCBS LOC determination regardless of who they are, right? If you want to be in waiver, you must have an active LOC on file, right? So you must do that. If your child is a family of one child and they can't use or don't need at this time, or maybe they use the service but no longer need the service, now for HCBS, in their family of one, they can stay in the waiver with health home care management. That was approved in August in our 1115. So the child can still, because I'm going to say this, as health home care management is like a waiver service. That's what I'll say. Similar to like the care at home previous, but the child still needs to be eligible for the waiver. So it's really important that everybody understands you cannot just stay in family of one Medicaid or stay in the waiver and get care management just because you're family of one. You still need to be eligible for the waiver, okay? So I've gotten that question a lot, so maybe we need to get some guidance out of it. Okay, so there's a question about the steps that need to happen when a child is stepping down from a residential treatment facility or a facility. So, so there's not a gap in services. So health home care management can go into a hospital, residential facility 30 days prior to discharge to do discharge planning. And at that time, they could do HCBS eligibility so that when the child is getting ready to discharge, they would already know if the child is eligible, and then they could start to develop a plan of care. So we have recently heard about some of the scenarios where maybe a child has gone into the hospital and they're not in the hospital even for 30 days, right? Maybe they're there a couple weeks. So just like any child going to the hospital for any reason, right, there needs to be a safe discharge plan. And of course, the health home care manager can assist with that. But if they haven't completed the HCBS LOC yet, then of course they wouldn't be able to get into HCBS. But many kids who come out of a higher level of care do have institutional Medicaid. So that means they have Medicaid for a short period of time. And so they could go and get enrolled in health home while the HCBS is getting completed, if that is an option. If the child is not safe to return home into their community without those HCBS services, then I think the child would have to stay in that hospital setting because there's not a safe discharge plan, and that the care manager quickly complete the HCBS. Now, I know that people have, made a lot of statements about the HCBS process, and that it's time-consuming. The good news is if a child is in one of those facilities, then you have all the right people, right, that have the historical information. You have LPHAs that should be roaming the halls of those fine institutions that could sign your documentation. So it should be less arduous to collect all that documentation if you have a child in one of those placements, because you have those professionals around that have been working with the child and know why the child came to the hospital or the RTF and would be able to assist you as a care manager to determine HCBS so the child can step down to HCBS services in their community. So how long does care managers have to do the override? For example, if the LOC expired in May, but they didn't submit the override until July, what happens? Well, this is an issue, right? So I will say this. When you determine that a child is no longer eligible, then you need to determine right now if that child needs an override and you need to submit it, right? So now you're waiting on the state, and that is why the child can stay in waiver. Now, we did put out that override guidance not until July. So if you had a kid in April or May that was not found eligible, we had told providers, don't do anything, keep them in waiver, we're coming up with a process. But we should have already received your override, right, because October is next week. So if you have this scenario where a kid was found not eligible and you're just getting around to doing their override, this would not be good practice, but please reach out to us because, again, our goal is not to have kids leave waiver services, right, because, you know, the state didn't get the process out fast enough or you didn't do what you needed to do. So we're all in this boat together. What I would say is if you didn't do it, you need to do it ASAP, and I would, you know, put on that form. We know this is late. Call us up, do something so that we can work with you. My concern is what have you been telling the family? And is the family still in services? Because you found out months ago that the child's not eligible anymore. So that is my concern. I also know that people have said to us that they have not done their HCBS, LOC, their annual. So we had given an extension for people to clean those up, but we're hearing that people are still not compliant. So we are going to be issuing another extension, but I have to tell you people that you are at audit risk. It's a mandate that children are assessed at least annually for LOC, and if you do not have that annual determination, then the child technically should not be receiving services. I say technically because don't go out and just discharge everyone. We are trying to work with folks, but just so folks know what the requirement is. Is there another?
There you are, yeah.
Okay, we still have a little more time. Okay, so there's a question. There are the checks and balances if a referral is entered in MAP, so that's our health home system, with HCBS recommendation that the health home care manager is doing the steps necessary to check on eligibility. So I don't know what check on eligibility means, but so the referral was built out, right, to include HCBS so that care managers, health homes, managed care plans would know that the person believes that the child might be eligible for HCBS or need HCBS. So again, I just want folks to know that the care manager then can see that referral, and so they should be able to determine especially their first meeting with the family, to get consent, right, whether or not they should start with HCBS determination or health home determination. The other thing I want to highlight is that the health home determination mimics the HCBS, right? So if your SED, serious emotional disturbance for health home, you would be SED, right? You would meet the target population for HCBS. You just need to do the other steps, right? The risk and the functional for HCBS. So the target populations mimic that of health home. So when you're getting the paperwork for MedFrag or for SED, then, you're really getting the paperwork also for health home. That's why one equals the other, so to speak, when you're HCBS eligible. So is there a check and balance? The health homes should be looking at that. We always have been watching how long it takes for referrals to get assigned. We have updated our processes, but I can go back and see what else we're doing about it. So with slots increasing, what is being done to increase the amount of providers available? I've had a very easy time getting a slot. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that was easy. But then trying to find a provider can be difficult and take time. So, HCBS is new in the sense of this consolidated waiver, and we have heard access issues. So the state partners, along with our managed care plans and folks, have had a number of meetings. We recently issued a survey to our HCBS providers to find out what some of the barriers are, and we are trying to look at what those issues are. What I would say to you is we expanded the services, but maybe not all the providers have been designated, or maybe they put themselves on hold of designation. Also, so we've, I'm going to bring up palliative care as an example. That was not a service that was routinely used, and now we have folks that are like, we want to use that service. So we have to build capacity in some areas. We've heard about respite for our medically frail population. In the care at home waivers, there was not a respite option, so for DOH care at home, I'll say. So now we're building that pretty much from scratch. So we do know that there's access complications there, and we are trying to address that. The other thing is we want to make sure that kids are matched to the appropriate services. So we have heard that a lot of our transitioning children are in CFTSS and HCBS. So my question is, does the child really need both services? Or does CFTSS, work for that child and that child's need? So, we don't want to have kids enrolled in services just to be in services. We want those services to be meaningful and match their needs. So we need to do a little bit of right sizing as well to free up maybe some services for kids who don't have services when kids may not need a service that they're in. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So I want you to know that we are aware of those issues. So I have a couple things here that our regions don't match OPWDD or the DOH regions and things, so we absolutely know that. We picked one set of regions. Not one state agency has the same regions, so they match the OMH region. I don't know why that is complicating anything. It's really for tracking purposes here at Capacity Management and to know where kids are at. So you would have to give us some feedback about what the complication is there, because I'm not sure I know. So is it still true that there's no capacity limit for the MedFrag population? That is true. But you still need a slot and you need to still be eligible. Just want to make sure. So somebody's asking, when the K codes get put up, when are they reflective in e-PACES or e-Medney? And I believe it's 24 hours. So 24 hours, I believe every night e-Medney is updated. I'm not sure about the whole weekend thing. Okay, so someone's saying e-Medney's right away, but e-PACES, there might be a delay of a day or two. So we'll go back and check on that. And if I'm wrong, we will let everybody know in an email through the listserv with the slide. So there's a question if the local school coordinators have access to see placement of children within their counties. So you're going to have to send me an email personally and explain what you're looking for because capacity management has raw numbers. I don't know what we could do, but I'm open to hear your ideas or what you're looking for. Okay, so somebody's asking who qualifies for care management as a distinct children's waiver service, any child, just family of one, is there a cap, and how should they indicate in the record and on the plan? Okay, so we're going to have to send guidance out because that's a very complex question. But I will say this, that the plan of care should always reflect the services that the child is getting and is needed, right? So if the child doesn't need any other HCBS service, then there wouldn't be a need that would be reflective of that. And if they are eligible for waiver and they need care management, then you would identify that need. And it's already a requirement through Health Home that the plan talks about what the role of the care manager is. What is the care manager going to do for that family? So that's already should be part of your plan of care. There is no cap, so I can definitely answer that question. So we will have to get some guidance out because there's been a lot of questions about it. Okay, so we have hit time, and I think we answered almost every question, right? Mm-hmm. So I appreciate everybody's time and your questions. And as I mentioned, the slide deck will go out through our listserv, and then will be posted on the MCTEC's website. And I hope this was very informative as a refresher. And again, if you have questions of capacity management, please email us so that we can assist you. And have a great day.